At the height of glamour, in a sun-drenched Los Angeles wedding venue, Jessica Monroe stood radiant yet unraveling, draped in couture and expectation. The air crackled with tension as the groom, Brandon West, heir to a real estate dynasty, remained conspicuously absent. Guests murmured beneath crystal chandeliers, cameras poised like vultures. Her mother, Diane, all rigid grace and barely masked fury, clutched her pearls while trying to maintain appearances. Then came the blow first, the tabloid alert showing Brandon in Miami with his ex. Then the handwritten note delivered with devastating finality. "I can't do this. I'm sorry." Gasps rippled. Jessica's world tilted, legs giving way, heart breaking in real time. She turned to flee the spectacle. But before she collapsed, Elijah Brooks, her driver silent, steady, always in the background, was suddenly there, arms around her like a fortress. He leaned in, his voice the only calm. "In the chaos, he didn't deserve you anyway." And as everything she knew cracked beneath her, it wasn't wealth or reputation or even blood that held hurt, was the man who had never once lied to her. Emma Sinclair had always lived in a gilded cage. Born into staggering wealth, her childhood was steeped in privilege, but never warmth. When her mother died suddenly at 11, the last flicker of affection in her life vanished. Her father, Richard Sinclair, sharp-edged titan of finance, responded, not with grief, but control. He shaped Emma into a brand, not a daughter, grooming her to carry the Sinclair legacy with poise and precision. In public, she sparkled, intelligent, elegant, disciplined. In private, she was a girl hollowed out by expectation. Jace Kingsley had seemed like the answer, a charismatic, self-made man from New Money, who made her laugh and claimed to love her, not her last name. With Jace, she thought maybe she could finally live for herself. But that dream shattered with brutal clarity when he disappeared on the day they were meant to marry. His betrayal splashed across the headlines. Now, Emma is trapped again, this time by shame. Richard demands she issue a press statement to protect the family image, but she refuses. Her silence is her only rebellion. She locks herself in her room, not eating, not speaking, her once perfect world collapsing into raw chaos. Downstairs, the household walks on eggshells. Her stepmother Caroline, always impeccably dressed and emotionally vacant, offers no comfort. Rachel, the so-called best friend who stood beside Emma at the altar, whispers more to Richard than to her. Only Marcus Davis, quiet, unreadable Marcus, the family's longtime driver, seems to notice the girl unraveling behind the designer gowns and shattered plans. Marcus has worked for the Sinclairs for 8 years, a man of few words and quiet strength, raised by a single, church-going mother in Alabama. He learned early how to move through the world unseen, dependable. To Emma, he was always a fixture, more than a person, until tonight. She tries to run, slipping past the staff, barefoot and tear-streaked, climbing into the back seat of the limo like it's the only safe place left. She doesn't expect anyone to come after her, but Marcus does. He finds her curled up in the dark leather seat, mascara smudged, breathing broken. She waits for him to scold her, to call the house. He doesn't. Instead, he gets behind the wheel and drives, no questions asked, his eyes ahead, his presence steady. He takes her somewhere, quiet, away from the house, the scandal, the legacy, where for the first time in her life, Emma isn't the Sinclair heiress. She's just a girl who was never taught how to fall apart. And beside her is a man who spent years watching, knowing, and now finally speaking. The city lights faded behind them as Marcus drove Emma in silence, the road winding toward a secluded hilltop on the outskirts of Los Angeles. The hum of the engine was the only sound between them until he parked and turned off the ignition. They sat there, bathed in the soft glow of the dashboard, surrounded by quiet, no photographers, no expectations, no walls closing in. For the first time in days, Emma exhaled. Her hands trembled in her lap, her eyes hollow. Then, as if something inside her finally gave permission, she broke. The tears came hard and fast, not just for Jace and the wedding, but for years of feeling trapped in a life that never felt like hers. She cried for her mother, for the little girl who'd never been allowed to grieve, for the woman shaped by other people's plans. Through it all, Marcus said nothing. He didn't rush her or try to fix it. He just sat beside her, solid and quiet, the kind of presence that made space without crowding it. And when she could finally speak, the words tumbled out about Jace, about her father, about always being the polished version of a person no one really knew. Marcus listened like it mattered, like she mattered. She wiped her face, tried to laugh, then sighed and reached for her phone, half out of habit. Her breath caught. A new clip was exploding online, already viral. Her father's voice, cold and furious, yelling at what appeared to be Jace's assistant. "I gave you 5 million to marry her. I'll destroy you if you think you can walk away now." Emma's heart stopped. There it was, confirmation that everything she feared was true. Jace hadn't loved her. He'd been bought. And her father, once again, had orchestrated her life like a business deal. Her engagement had been nothing but a transaction, and she, just another asset. Something inside her cracked wide open. She turned to Marcus, her voice small and tight, barely above a whisper. "It was never real. None of it. I don't want to go back there." For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, softly, "Then don't." She looked at him, startled. "What?" He met her gaze, steady and unreadable. "You don't have to go back. You can stay in the limo all night if that's what you need. Or," he hesitated, "you can come stay at my place, just for a few days. It's nothing fancy, but your father would never think to look for you there." Emma stared at him, stunned by the simplicity of the offer. No lectures, no conditions, just a quiet door being held open. For the first time in her life, someone was giving her a choice, and she said yes. Emma stayed in Marcus' modest two-bedroom home on the quieter edges of the city, a world away from marble floors and glass towers. His mother, Mrs. Davis, welcomed her with a warmth so effortless it startled her. No polished smiles or transactional niceties, just real kindness. Soft hands offering her tea, and eyes that didn't flinch at her brokenness. Emma, used to staff, who served out of obligation or fear, had never known this kind of grace. The walls of the house were filled with family photos, sun-faded curtains, and the quiet hum of a life built on resilience rather than wealth. The silence wasn't oppressive, here it was healing. At first, Emma didn't know what to do with herself. There were no PR teams, no stylists, no morning briefings from her father's assistant. But slowly, she began to unlearn. She helped cook, despite burning rice the first few times, folded laundry beside Mrs. Davis, and walked to the local market with a canvas bag over her shoulder. Neighbors smiled at her like she was anyone, and for once, she didn't feel like a headline, just a woman trying to live. Marcus stayed reserved, his watchfulness unchanged, but their conversations began to stretch beyond polite nods. They'd sit on the porch at night, sharing quiet stories about Alabama, about boarding school, about the ache of being raised without tenderness. Emma began to see him not just as a driver, but as a man with quiet depths and steady hands. There was something between them, unspoken, delicate, a thread neither of them dared tug too hard. But peace was never going to last. Her father found her. One afternoon, 2 men in tailored suits showed up at Marcus' front steps like they owned the street, demanding Emma return. When she refused, they warned her of the consequences. Minutes later, Richard Sinclair called her directly, his voice low and venomous. "You're embarrassing yourself. Come home now or I'll cut you off." Emma didn't hesitate. "Then do it," she said, her voice steady. "Cut me off." And just like that, she severed the last thread of control he had over her. In the Days that followed, Emma began to rebuild. She found work at a small bookstore nestled between a laundromat and a taco stand, dusty, cramped, but filled with people who loved books like lifelines. She started journaling in the mornings, pouring out years of words she'd never said. She found a therapist online and met with her weekly in the quiet of Marcus' spare room. One night, she confronted Rachel, who had been feeding updates to her father in exchange for social favors. Emma ended it with a single, exhausted sentence. "We were never really friends." And then she let it go. The media lost interest. News scandals replaced hers. But Emma didn't care. For the first time in her life, she wasn't performing. She began to see Marcus more clearly, the quiet thoughtfulness in how he noticed when her shoulders tensed, how he fixed the squeaky floorboard near the guest room without being asked. One evening, after Emma returned from the bookstore, he was in the kitchen, cooking for his mother. They talked while washing dishes, laughing more freely now. She asked him why he never became a teacher. His calm would have suited it perfectly. He paused, then said, "I wanted to, but when my mom got sick, I dropped out. Driving paid the bills." There was no resentment in his voice, just quiet truth. Emma looked at him differently than not, with pity, but with a fierce respect. Tension built in silence after that. Their conversations lingered longer. Their eyes held just a beat more. After a small family dinner one night, just the three of them, simple food, too much laughter, Marcus clean up. Music played, low from the radio. She handed him a plate, and for a second, their hands touched. Something shifted. He looked at her like he'd been trying not to for weeks. She leaned in, and he didn't move. Their lips were inches apart, breaths mingling. But then, suddenly, Marcus stepped back. His jaw was tight, eyes unreadable. "You don't belong in my world," he said, almost a whisper. Emma froze. Hurt flashed across her face before she could hide it. She left the kitchen without a word, the weight of his rejection hitting harder than she expected. And as she closed the door to her room that night, she realized the hardest part wasn't losing Jace, or the money, or even her father. It was feeling something real, and being told she couldn't have it. The storm came back faster than Emma expected. Just when the dust had begun to settle, Richard Sinclair struck with full force, filing a lawsuit against his own daughter for emotional and financial damage to the Sinclair brand. He cited a buried clause in her trust that allowed the family to sever her inheritance if her actions publicly disgraced the company. Her disappearance, her refusal to return home, and worst of all, her inappropriate entanglement with household staff were now grounds for erasure. The media latched on like vultures, headlines accusing her of everything from reckless instability to gold-digging Marcus. Paparazzi circled Marcus Street. His mother's church received calls. Emma, once again, was the scandal. But this time, she didn't hide. This time, she fought. With a pro bono lawyer, fierce, brilliant woman who'd once interned under Richard before quitting in protest. Emma prepared for battle. Marcus stood beside her every step, never asking for thanks, never needing to be seen. He drove her to meetings, waited outside court prep, made sure she ate when her nerves killed her appetite. The courthouse was packed on the day of the hearing. Richard arrived, smug, confident in his grip on power. Emma walked in quietly, but with her head high. Cameras flashed, whispers stirred. No one expected her to win. But the twist unraveled fast. In court, her lawyer revealed new evidence recordings Jace had made in the weeks leading up to the wedding. In them, Emma's voice was clear, hesitant, but firm. She told Jace she didn't think she could go through with it, that something felt wrong, that she needed time. Jace, likely recording for leverage, had saved it all. In a second clip, Richard's voice thundered across the speakers. "If you don't follow through, I'll have you committed for emotional instability. I'll make sure no one ever takes you seriously again." The courtroom fell into stunned silence. Gasps echoed. Caroline Sinclair rose from her seat and, without a word, walked out. Then came Emma's moment. She took the stand, her hands trembling slightly as she held a glass of water. The room was silent. Her voice shook at first, but she steadied herself. She spoke about losing her mother, how her grief had been boxed and silenced, about growing up in a house where love had conditions and control masqueraded as protection. She admitted to being scared, to playing along for years just to survive. "I wasn't running from a wedding," she said. "I was running from a lifetime of being told who to be. I begged to be seen, to be loved, to be safe. And the one time I chose for myself, I was punished." She paused, her eyes on her father. "I'm not the one who should be on trial. He is." By the time she stepped down, the courtroom had shifted. The judge looked long and hard at Richard before rendering the decision. The case was thrown out. There was no legal basis for the claims. Emma was declared mentally competent and, more importantly, fully emancipated from her trust. The money was gone. She wouldn't inherit a cent, but her name was finally her own. She left the courthouse not as a Sinclair, not as a scandal, but as herself. No more lies, no more leashes, just Emma battered but unbroken. Emma moved out a week after the verdict. She packed her few belongings into boxes by herself. No staff, no entourage, just her and the quiet satisfaction of choosing her next chapter. She rented a small apartment above a flower shop in a quieter part of the city, with chipped paint and creaky floors, but sunlight that poured in like hope. The bookstore promoted her to assistant manager, and she threw herself into work organizing community readings, writing personalized recommendations on index cards, slowly building a life with texture and meaning. At night, she wrote. Her blog, Runaway Bride, The Life After the Altar, started as a form of therapy, but within weeks, it went viral. Thousands of women wrote to her, strangers who'd also been trapped, silenced, dismissed. She answered as many as she could. She didn't need headlines anymore. She had her voice. Weeks passed before Marcus appeared again. It was a slow Sunday afternoon, and she was folding new arrivals at the store when she saw him through the front window. He walked in, hat in hand, eyes softer than she remembered. He apologized, not just for the night he pushed her away, but for believing he wasn't enough. "I thought I had to let you go because I didn't deserve you. But when I saw you in that courtroom, you didn't just fight back, you freed yourself, and it made me realize I don't want to be a man who hides behind fear anymore." He looked at her then, his voice low and certain. "I didn't step in at your wedding because I loved you. I stepped in because I saw you, and I'll never stop seeing you." They didn't kiss. There was no grand, cinematic moment, just a long silence, a few quiet tears, and the warmth of their hands finding each other naturally, like they always should have. No labels, no pressure, just presence. A beginning. Later that week, they were spotted walking together through the campus of his old high school. Emma held a folder in one hand, his in the other. She'd helped him enroll for his GED, while she rebuilt. She made sure Marcus could start again, too. And though they were far from the glitz of ballrooms and billionaires, they were exactly where they belonged, to people choosing to live honestly, side by side. They say when you're left at the altar, you're supposed to fall apart. But what if it's the day you finally woke up? Emma's voice drifted softly over the image of her in her tiny, sunlit apartment, curled on the couch with her laptop, barefoot, at peace. She types with purpose, the hum of the city far below, her smile quiet and real. "My father lost control. My fiancé ran. And in that silence, I found someone who never wanted to own me, just see me." The screen cuts to Marcus at her kitchen table, a pencil between his fingers, brow furrowed over a GED math worksheet. Emma leans over his shoulder, gently correcting a mistake, and he laughs, nudging her playfully. It's the kind of laughter that fills a room without needing permission. She grins, brushing a curl behind her ear, and their eyes meet not with longing, but with the easy grace of two people who've survived the fire and decided to keep walking forward together. The image lingers simple, whole before fading to black.